Hello everyone, I'm Malcolm Pein, an international master from England, and I've recorded this video today to help you unravel the mysteries of the first game of the World Chess Championship being played at Dubai Expo 2020 between defending champion Magnus Carlsen and the challenger Ne2 We'll be using the app DecodeChess, which you can see online, that helps you analyse, deconstruct and learn from the world's best chess engines, which will explain to you, not with just variations or numbers illustrating an assessment, but also with natural language, which I think makes it a lot easier to learn the game, particularly for beginners and improvers. So let's go to the app and start looking at this game, which would ended up in a draw after 45 moves. What I think is particularly useful for the purposes of illustrating DecodeChess here is that there was a kind of a disagreement between the computers who were analysing the game and the humans who were analysing the game, including at least one of the players, Magnus. The computers rather liked having an extra pawn, which white had, whereas the humans quite liked having the two bishops and rather more space. Let's see if DecodeChess can unravel some of these mysteries for us. I'll whiz through the opening fairly quickly. It was a Re-Lopez, and Magnus did not play this move knight f6, the Berlin defence, which can lead to slightly boring and stodgy positions, although not always. We went into a main line of the Re-Lopez. And at this point, Magnus threatened, in inverted commas, to play the martial attack. And I'll just explain what the martial attack is. The typical Re-Lopez move here would be c3 in order to take the centre with d2 to d4. But in that circumstance, black can sacrifice a pawn like this. And this is just the main variation. White tries to develop his pieces, and black attacks on the king side and is now threatening something very nasty on h2. So when Ne2 played h3, he rendered that queen h4 threat nothing. And also, if black tries to sacrifice a pawn, white will be able to get his knight out to a natural square c3 without it being hindered by his own pawns. So this is one of the points of h3. In the position after h3, bishop b7 or d6 are typical, but Magnus played this unusual knight a5 move, which creates an imbalance. White says, thank you, I'll have a pawn, and black says, well, thank you, I'll have your best minor piece, and slightly weaken your pawns. Carlsen developed his bishop and threatened the e4 pawn, and Ne2 defended it. And in this position, the natural thing to do is to try and open up the game for the two bishops, which is what Carlsen did. And this was a rather interesting point in the game, I thought, if you didn't know the theory. Black is threatening queen takes g2, mate. Clearly isn't going to happen in a World Championship game. What's the best move for white here? Let's ask DecodeChess to explain it to us. And here it comes. Queen f3 is beneficial because it threatens to play knight c3, so you've got this little arrow showing you there, which will threaten the black queen on d5, and it shields the g2 pawn from the black queen. And it also tells you that it's better than the alternatives, which you can analyse. There's also a very helpful major threat section here for black. Queen takes g2, bishop b4 potentially, so you can see all the ideas that your opponent is trying to come up with. Alright, let's go further down the game. Queen f3 was played, and this again I thought was an interesting point to ask DecodeChess what it thought and why. It's telling you why. This is the difference between DecodeChess and a lot of other products. So bishop d6. Why is that? Well, because it threatens to play queen takes e5. Really? Well, let's play bishop d6. And this is the interesting point. If you play the move knight c3, which looks completely natural, queen takes e5. And after rook takes e5, bishop takes f3, it doesn't take long to realise that black's going to emerge with extra material. So thank you for explaining that one. But then we saw Ne2's home analysis. He'd obviously looked at this position with a computer, and he played a move that I'd never seen before, but it's been played by engines, not by humans. And of course, DecodeChess comes up with it. Most unusual move was played, king f1. Well, why is that good? It supports the rook on e1, and it stops queen h2 from being check, and intends to play queen takes d5, obviously. And this is very interesting. So after king f1, we see something quite illustrative. If we try this queen takes e5 idea, queen takes b7, queen h2, as Decode said, is no longer check. And actually, white can just calmly continue with bishop e3 and knight d2. And if you analyse this position, you'll see that actually white is better. So after king f1, Magnus played this remarkable move, rook fb8. And that, I think, certainly to someone just learning the game, is a very, very mysterious move. So I thought, well, as DecodeChess, white wants to do that, and it comes up straight away. Well, it says it's beneficial because it threatens to play queen takes e5, because the bishop on b7 is now defended, if you refer back to the last variation. Again, it's listing the major threats down here, and it says that rook fb8 creates the threat of queen takes e5, and now white has to play queen takes d5, which is indeed what happened. Bishop d2, white's just developing his pieces, and black takes more space. Knight f3. That was quite an interesting move from Nepo. I think still preparation. He wants to move his rook to c1 to defend his pawn. Interestingly enough, a lot of engines have played in this position knight c3. And after knight b4, gone rook c1, but Nepo didn't fancy that. Back to the game. Rook d8. Knight c3. And now, what should black do? He's got so many choices. Well, let's ask DecodeChess. Knight b4 it wants to play. And why? Threatens to play knight takes c2. Yes, we can see that that's a threat. Escapes capture by the white knight. And also puts a bit more influence from the rook on d8 on the d4 square. You've also got, again, the major threats listed here. And knight b4 was indeed what Carlsen played. This was rather a subtle point, and I wasn't planning to put it in the video, but I did wonder. I mean, in this position, Nepo played rook ec1. He could play rook ac1. That looked a little bit more natural, but at the same time unnatural, because the rook is on an open file. I'd recommend you have a look at both moves with DecodeChess. For the moment, we'll just follow the game. Rook ec1. Rook ac8 developing. And now white came up with a very, very interesting manoeuvre. I just want to ask DecodeChess what it wants to do here, what it's thinking about. Well, it quite likes knight e2 because it vacates c3 and allows the white bishop to go there. Well, this is quite interesting because for me, as we'll see with the move knight e2, I quite like the idea of playing bishop f4 to try and swap off the bishops. And it was here that when I questioned the program, I was pleased that actually it agreed with me. Although it liked knight e1, when I gave it bishop f4 and asked it what it was thinking, it really liked it. It said white's got a big advantage. And I think that this was actually Nepo's best move. If your opponent's got the two bishops, it's logical to try and exchange them, one of them, because they work well together. And this is actually 0.87, just about the biggest number I think that came up in any variation in the game. But that's not what actually happened. What actually happened was that Nepo went bishop e3 first, and this gave Carlsen an opportunity to unleash his light bishop. And now when Nepo tries to exchange, Decode and Magnus Carlsen are totally in sync. Bishop takes f3 is the right move. And then an exchange, and once again, rook c6 was also the move that the computers wanted. And hereabouts, I began to wonder even though white had an extra pawn, whether he might not be suffering, because rook's coming across here. Black's just a lot more active. Rook E1 attacking the knight, knight F5. Can't let a knight come into D4, it would be attacking, if you look at this move comes here, it's threatening two big pawns, that would be a disaster. Knight H4, forcing Rook E3 pretty much. And now Magnus played King F8. Knight G2. And now G6. And this is where I was a little bit suspicious of Nepo's play. I thought the right move was just King E2. And when you asked Decode, when I asked it afterwards, if I remember well, it agreed with me. King E2 is beneficial because it supports the pawn on D3 and intends to play in some positions Rook E4. And here you've got all the moves that Decode think are reasonable. I didn't like Knight E1 by Nepo at all. I thought that discoordinated his pieces. And this was such a lovely move, Knight G7. The idea, as Decode will tell you, take my word for it, it's just that Knight E6 becomes a really good move. And once you come to E6, you can also come to F4 when you're threatening two more weak pawns. Black takes another square from White's rooks and starts advancing. And this was really interesting because the position is still equal-ish. Some computers would give White a small advantage because Black isn't winning the pawn back immediately. But once you see Black's next idea, you realise that in fact he has quite a lot of counterplay. And let's ask Decode to explain this in natural language. What I would say to you is, when I see a couple of double pawns and the front double pawn can't be defended by another pawn, that always makes it a target. So let's put the engine on. There we are. B4 is good, it says, and indeed that's what Magnus played without thinking too much. And the point was that, as Decode said on the previous screen, the threat now is Rook B8, which is really quite unpleasant because it's very, very hard for White to defend his pawn. He absolutely doesn't want to play pawn takes pawn here. That would be positionally disastrous. Can you see all this? Instead of having one pawn island in this position, that lump of 4, he suddenly effectively got 3, all weak and isolated. And Black's rook is coming into C2, and the D4 square is available. That would be a catastrophe. So B4 was a very, very good move. And Decode explains it, that it's making B3 vulnerable. So no, we do not want to play C takes B4. So Nepo found a way to the draw. He decided he just had to give back the extra pawn. And that's what he did. Now he played H4, just stopping that pawn ever being en prise if a knight came to F4. And not too much happened, but I'll finish this video with just a little tactic which was pointed out by Carlsen in the press conference. Carlsen played Rook D7 and they repeated moves shortly afterwards, but Carlsen did make the point that he might have tried Knight F4 here, because if Rook A4, there's a lovely little cheapo, Rook B2. And Black would win that ending with an extra pawn and a better structure. Let's just see how the game ended. Rook D7, Knight C4, Rook E7, Knight E5. Would you like to repeat moves and go to the press conference? Well, I definitely think about it. I definitely want to go to the press conference. All right then. And off they went. So very interesting game. All equal going into the second game, where Carlsen will be White. I hope that's provided with an illustration of how DecodeChess can help you improve your game and obtain a decent understanding of games even at the very, very top level. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Malcolm Pein and I'll be back with another video tomorrow.